بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس إن وعد الله حق فلا تغرنكم الحياة الدنيا ولا يغرنكم بالله الغرور. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the purification of the souls and the enlightenment of the hearts, and for the hastening of the reappearance of Baqiyatullah Al-Adham, Ruhi wa Arwahul Alameen Lahul Fida, enlighten your souls in the atmosphere with the recitation of salawat upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Respected brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It was 1963. A man stood in a congregation of many thousand. He defied the system and the teachings of that time. He delivered a famous, powerful sermon. He uttered the words, "I have a dream today." The sermon delivered by a man by the name of Martin Luther King, which was delivered in the mass of the people that had gathered in order to demand the civil rights of the blacks and those of the minorities in the United States, is seen to be one of the most important and historically recorded sermons and speeches made within current times. You'll find, if you examine the history of human beings, many people delivering sermons and speeches which have indeed inspired others to follow them and to take from their lives. You'll find, for instance, that in 1964 Nelson Mandela famously uttered the speech that "I am prepared to die." This was in retaliation against the apartheid regime. Likewise, people like Gandhi in India made this speech against the British colonial rule, where he said, "Quit India." The speeches throughout the history of mankind, therefore, are crucial and important and serve to be an instrument for an individual to present an idea, or in order for that particular idea to grow and to be understood by the masses and by the people. When it comes to the history of the religion of Islam, we are also told that sermons and speeches and lectures delivered by the great personalities such as Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, together with his infallible, immaculate progeny, also serve to be quite important and actually are more crucial for us to appreciate and understand than the other sermons. Notice how Rasulullah, when he would come to deliver the sermon at the beginning in Medina, he would rest on a palm tree. He would rest on this palm tree and would deliver, for instance, a lecture or a sermon. Later on, they built a small mimbar for Rasulullah. When he moved and he sat on the mimbar, the narrations from both Sunni and Shia sources tell us that the particular sound that could be heard from that tree was like a groaning, a moaning sound. And therefore the Prophet said, this particular tree trunk is moaning because I have left it and now I'm sitting on a mimbar. Rasulullah commanded that when this tree dies, it will be buried in that particular place. And today, if you go to Masjidul Nabawi Sharif, you'll find a pillar that is known as Ustuwanatul Hanana or Al-Hannana, means the pillar of the tree that used to moan and groan. Why? Because it enjoyed the presence of Rasulullah when he was delivering a lecture and was giving a sermon. Likewise, if you analyze and examine Nahjul Balagha, this wonderful collection of letters and sermons of Amir al-Mu'mineen, more than 241 are found in Nahjul Balagha. Sayyid al-Shuhada Aba Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, on the plains of Karbala on the 10th of Muharram, would deliver a number of important sermons in order to awaken the conscience of the people and to present them with the facts and the truth. And indeed, when it came to the Ahl al-Bayt, one by one they would utilize this tool in order to disseminate the message and propagate the teachings of the Quran and the Holy Prophet of Islam. When we examine the life of Imam Zayn al-Abidin al-Sajjad, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh, many of us would be able to recall the famous sermon delivered in the courtyard of Yazid. This sermon that serves as an indicator and indeed stands out as a unique sermon in the history of Islam. If today you are asked the question, who was the first man who gave Majlisul Hussaini? Who is the first individual who gave a lecture or a sermon or a khutbah the way you and I are accustomed to? In other words, to begin with the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to speak about an Islamic subject and to end it with the masa'ib of Aba Abdullah. The first human being to do so was Imam Zayn al-Abidin. And therefore we seek him as our role model when we sit there on the minbar and to deliver these lectures and these sermons, because he would initiate this process and this action which is indeed pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is to remind people about the ultimate sacrifice and the movement of Sayyidul Shuhada salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. And therefore the sermon of Imam Zayn al-Abidin stands out for that particular matter to start off with, that indeed it was the first lecture that was structured in such a way. Secondly, it was the lecture and the sermon and the speech that ignited in the hearts the feeling that Sayyid al-Shuhada and the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam have been oppressed, and was the tool to awaken people from their deep slumber that they had gone through. Because we know the state and the situation at that time, and especially in Sham, especially in Damascus, the way people would look at the glorious infallible progeny of the Holy Prophet. Hence, Imam Zayn al-Abidin would utilize this opportunity at the courtyard of Yazid. Narrations tell us on the 2nd of the month of Safar, a day after Sayyida Zaynab salawatullahi wa salamu alayha had delivered her sermon, where in the palace of Yazid in Sham. We are told that Yazid ibn Muawiyah did what his father, and what his father initiated, this practice of cursing the Ahl al-Bayt, especially Ali ibn Abi Talib, from the minbar. So he would instruct somebody and say, sit on the minbar and speak. This man would stand and would sit on the minbar and would begin to curse Ali ibn Abi Talib. Imam Zayn al-Abidin would not tolerate this. He would stand up and say, وَيْحَكْ, woe be to you, لَقَدْ اشْتَرَيْتَ رِضَى الْمَخْلُوقِ بِسَخَطِ الْخَالِقِ. You have indeed purchased the pleasure of the created over the anger of the Creator. فَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَكَ مِنَ النَّارِ. Let you anticipate your position in hellfire. And then he looked at Yazid and said, Ya Yazid, give me permission لِأَصْعَدَ هَذِهِ الْأَعْوَادِ, so that I would stand on these pillars. Why did Imam Zayn al-Abidin not say minbar? Why didn't he say, I want to sit or stand on the minbar and to deliver a sermon? According to most of our narrations, because the khutbah of Imam Zayn al-Abidin is narrated in many historical records, most of them say that Imam Zayn al-Abidin used the word a'wad, not minbar. Why? Because the minbar of the Holy Prophet is a minbar that indeed reminds people and gets people closer to Rasulullah and his Ahl al-Bayt. It's not the minbar that the teachings of the shaitan are taught and the infallible progeny, the extension of Rasulullah, are cursed. And therefore that particular minbar that had witnessed this type of practice, Imam Zayn al-Abidin would not call it a minbar. He would say this is an a'wad, pieces of wood that are constructed together. Why? Imam would say, لِأَقُولَ قَوْلًا فِيهِ لِلَّهِ رِضَى وَلِهَؤُلَاءِ النَّاسِ أَجْرٌ وَثَوَابٌ. Imam would give us, you and I, a practical demonstration of what a lecture or a sermon should serve to do. Imam says, I am going to deliver a lecture that would have two ultimate purposes. First of all, pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and secondly, it would be beneficial for the masses, beneficial for the people. This is a clear indication for those who sit on the minbar and for those who stand on any particular podium in order to deliver lectures that are considered Islamic in nature, are they fulfilling these two qualities or characteristics or not? Are they following what Imam Zayn al-Abidin said, that I want to please Allah and I want the masses to benefit? Is that in their mind, or do they have other objectives? Because if they have other objectives, they are not following the path of the Ahl al-Bayt in terms of delivering what the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam want from those who have been given this honor and prestige to speak to the masses and to disseminate and to spread the knowledge. Sometimes we get carried away. Sometimes we utilize the member for our own personal objectives. Sometimes we do not study the crowd and their needs and their wants and the needs of the community and the society. Sometimes we get carried away. I recall that one of the ulama, one of the khutaba said that he heard there was a khatib who went to a village somewhere. And when he went to that village, he was giving a lecture during the 10 days of the commemoration of the tragedy of Ashura. On one of the nights, his entire lecture was based upon oxygen and hydrogen and how they come together to make the water molecule. And he wanted to come to the end, at the end, in order to give some kind of an analogy or an indication or some kind of link. When he finished this particular khatib, when he came down, somebody came to him and said, Maulana, I'm confused. Can you tell me, oxygen and hydrogen, which one follows Imam Hussein and which one follows Yazid again? This was the mentality of the people. There is no problem in talking about science and linking scientific discoveries, but ultimately the purpose should be to illuminate the heart, to inspire people, to motivate the masses to follow the path of Ali Muhammad, which is the path of Islam, the purified Islam, the not distorted Islam, and to make them stronger human beings within that particular ideology, the ideology of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhum as-salam. And therefore Imam Zayn al-Abidin sets the precedence for lecturers, sets the precedence for muballighin, for those who serve the Ahl al-Bayt through this particular medium. And of course, most lectures today, when they talk about the sermon of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, they'll say that after there was some kind of commotion at that time, Yazid would not allow Imam Zayn al-Abidin to deliver his sermon. Why? Because he would say, if he would to stand or to sit on this minbar, he would expose me and he would expose Ali Abi Sufyan. He would talk about my family in such a way that would turn the people against me. There was a Roman ambassador sitting next to him. He said, I want to report to my country and to my king, this man is ill, pointing to Imam Zayn al-Abidin. I want to see what he's talking about. Give him the opportunity, allow him to speak. Yazid looks at him and says, إِنَّهُ مِنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتٍ زُقُّ الْعِلْمَ زَقًّا. This man is from the progeny of the Holy Prophet who are drenched in knowledge. I know what he is about to do. Yazid was fully aware of the position of Imam Al-Sajjad alayhi salam. Yet because of pressure, he allowed Imam Al-Sajjad to sit and to deliver the sermon. Now many of you would have probably heard that the sermon starts with the following. أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ أُعْطِينَا سِتًّا وَفُضِّلْنَا بِسَبْعٍ. We were given 6 and honored with 7. True? Many of you will come to the idea that this is the beginning of the sermon. That's how the Imam would begin after mentioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sending the praises upon the Holy Prophet and his forefathers. He would begin with this. He would say, أعطينا الحلم والعلم والسماحة والفصاحة والشجاعة والمحبة في قلوب المؤمنين. We were given 6 and we were honored with 7. The question that might come to your mind, and I want you to ask yourself this question. Why did Imam Zayn al-Abidin say we were given 6? Why 6 and not more than 6? When it came to 6, number 1, why was it this number? Were they not given more than that? What about Isma? So-called infallibility. Why didn't Imam Zayn al-Abidin say we were given Isma? Whereas he is ma'soom. All the Ahlul Bayt are ma'soomeen. Why didn't he say that? And secondly, why did he say we were given 6 and honored 7? وَفُضِّلْنَا بِأَنَّ مِنَّا النَّبِيُّ الْمُخْتَارِ. وَمِنَّا الصِّدِّيقِ. From amongst us there is the Siddiq. Because Amir al-Mu'mineen says, أَنَا الصِّدِّيقُ الْأَكْبَرُ. I am the one who is referred to as Siddiq. And whomsoever claims to be a Siddiq other than me, they are a liar. They are a liar. The truthful one whose sidq manifested in his actions and his speech. And then he would say, وَمِنَّا أَسَدُ اللَّهِ وَأَسَدُ رَسُولِهِ. And from amongst us is the lion of Allah and the lion of His Prophet, who is Hamza. Before Sayyid al-Shuhada he was referred to as this. And then he says from amongst us is Ja'far al-Tayyar, وَمِنَّا سَيِّدَةُ النِّسَاءِ وَمِنَّا صِبْطَى هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ Imam Hassan and Hussein, وَمِنَّا مَهْدِيُّهَا. Imam would say we have these, we were given 7, honored with 7, but before that he had said we were indeed bestowed with 6. What's the difference between this 6 and the 7? Aren't they all part of it? Try to understand this, because most of the times you come through a sermon and you do not reflect on this particular distinction that exists. Our scholars say there is a difference between al-i'ta'u al-dhati wal-i'ta'u al-iktisabi. What's the difference between those? Some people today, they say we are sada. We are from the progeny of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his holy progeny. And therefore, we automatically, by given that particular title, are entitled, without any other restrictions or conditions, automatically we deserve more respect. Our scholars say, indeed, Sayyids, the Sada, the progeny of the Holy Prophet, are those who carry this particular line from the Holy Prophet. And indeed should be honored, but honored when it comes to practically demonstrating this honor in their actions. In which way? Imam alayhi salam is saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala examined us and saw that we have the potential and therefore gave us these 6 qualities, and therefore we built on them. But not only the fact that we are from the Prophet's family that we are honored, is because we demonstrated these qualities in our actions. It's because not only did we talk the talk, but we walked the walk. We were complete manifestations, the embodiments of these qualities in actions, which means that when it comes to an individual who is a Sayyid, would be honored if their akhlaq, if their mannerism, if their speech, if their conduct is that of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. That's when they obtain this particular prestige and honor that they deserve. That these two have to go in line. That you earn these qualities, al-iktisab al-dhati or al-i'ta' al-dhati and i'ta' al-iktisabi. That yes, you are not particularly had the choice to become a Sayyid, yet if you prove these qualities in your characteristics, then you will be honored. Therefore, Imam Zayn al-Abidin comes and says this. But some people ask, why did he not mention other qualities? Why did he not refer to other characteristics? And the answer is, or one particular opinion is, if you look at these 6 virtues, they are the summary of the best aspect and characteristics that the human being can possess. That they are the pinnacle in which all the other characteristics are derived from. Like what? If you look at Isma, what is Isma? Isma is knowledge. Isma is the ability to know about the consequences of actions. And therefore Imam would say, أُعْطِينَا الْعِلْمَ وَالْحِلْمِ. So we have the knowledge. And Isma falls under the category of ilm. When the Imam talks about these are considered the mother of characteristics and qualities. These are characteristics of a human being who is truly a man of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Question. Imam alayhi salam then goes on to say أنا ابن مكة ومنى أنا ابن زمزم والصفا أنا ابن من حمل الركن بأطراف الردى. I am the son of the one who is from Mecca and Mina. I am the son of the one who is from Safa. I am the one who carried the black stone using his own clothes. Why does the Imam say this ana? Because some people say this ana is not good. It's a demonstration of a human being's, God forbid, egoistic tendencies. If anybody would sit on the minbar or anywhere else and was to say, I am somebody, I am so on, I am this person, I am that person, people will generally say, why are they talking about themselves in such a manner? So you might have somebody asking you, when they examine the khutbah of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, why does the grandson of Rasulullah here mention more than 13 qualities and characteristics of Rasulullah and over 70 fada'il of Amir al-Mu'mineen? Over 70 virtues of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He would mention this continuously throughout his sermon. I am the one who fought with the 2 swords. I am the one who defended the religion of Islam using 2 spears. I am the one who stood in Badr and Hunayn. Imam would say this. People would say, but why? Why does he need to say the ana and the me and the me? We need to distinguish between 2 types of self-expression. There is a type of self-expression which is used to boost one's ego, and the purpose is to obtain self-recognition. And there is one that is done in order to elevate the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to spread the message. Understand how this was practiced by the Holy Prophet and by the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. Amir al-Mu'mineen, where in Khaybar says, أَنَا الَّذِي سَمَّتْنِي أُمِّي حَيْدَرًا. He would say this. In other words, he is proud to say who he was in order to remind people. It's not to get people to somewhat appreciate or to give him praise, but the motive, the intention is sincere for Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. The whole idea, and especially at that time, where over thousands of members, the name of Ali ibn Abi Talib was cursed, whereby the Ahl al-Bayt were despised under this false propaganda of Muawiyah and Yazid, whereby people would rejoice when they see the grandson of the Holy Prophet chained and his granddaughters moved from one direction to another, whereby a man would go to Sham and would see nobody being named out of the children Hassan and Hussein. And you would find one household with the child by the name of Hassan and another one by the name of Hussein. And he would be amazed. In Sham, he would say, why have you named your children Hassan and Hussein? Nobody in this particular area names them after the grandsons of the Holy Prophet. The father would say, my habit is to curse my children, and that's why I've named them Hassan and Hussein. This is the extent of the hatred and the animosity towards the Ahl al-Bayt. And therefore when Imam Zayn al-Abidin would sit on the minbar and would remind people about who his forefathers are, about his grandfather, about his line, when he would speak about this, he is trying to give the people an understanding as to whom they are mistreating. What kind of atrocity and what kind of crime and oppression are they perpetrating? And therefore the goal is sublime, the goal is holistic, the goal is to awaken people. And that's indeed was the motive of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. You'll see people crying. If you read the sermon, you'll find people were weeping and crying because they recognized and they were reminded about these groups of individuals and their status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yet, what I wish to bring to your attention was the fact that Imam Zayn al-Abidin did not begin his majlis, his lecture, his sermon with this idea of أُعْطِينَا سِتًّا وَفُضِّلْنَا بِسَبْعٍ. Sometimes when we analyze it, we bypass the introduction. The introduction, my dear brothers and sisters, is of the greatest importance. And the introduction serves to highlight the problem of the people at that time. The introduction, if you read the khutbah of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, the introduction was based about understanding that the situation needed for people to be reminded about certain elements that you and I know about. So what did the Imam alayhi salam says? He says, أيها الناس أحذركم من الدنيا وما فيها. Oh people, at the beginning, before he talks about the 6 and the 7, he says to people, oh people, I am warning you about this world and what it's contained within. فإنها دار زوال وانتقال. This particular existence, the Imam would say, at the onset of his lecture, he would remind people about this world. Why? Why did he need to speak about this at this particular moment when the people are gathered and before he introduces who he is? Because the motive and the objective of awliyaullah, of those who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that they utilize any opportunity to get people to understand and to get them closer to God and their purpose in existence. Notice Yusuf, Prophet Yusuf ala nabiyyina wa ala alihi wa alayhi afdal salatu wassalam. When he was in prison, there was 2 people who were with him. They came to him and said, we heard that you know how to interpret the dreams. This is our dream. Tell us, what does it mean? So what does Yusuf do? He immediately tells them the interpretation of the dream, doesn't he? He doesn't. Sadly. He doesn't. What does he do? He starts his particular interpretation of the dream by talking about Tawheed, by talking about monotheism, by emphasizing the worship of the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means what? Inside the prison dungeon, he's using the opportunity that these 2 people have got close to them, and therefore they're asking a question. How wonderful it is that we take this on board in our day-to-day lives, at school, at college, at university, at our place of work. If somebody comes and asks us about our practice, if somebody who comes and tells us about Sha'air al-Hussein, if somebody comes and tells us, why are there 15 million human beings walking to Karbala? What is so special? I saw it on the news. Use that opportunity. Don't say, oh, it's a practice and move on. Feel proud of your faith. Feel proud of the Ahl al-Bayt. Feel proud of these wonderful sha'air in all of its forms, in all of its ways. Understand the background behind it and ignite the passion and the interest in the hearts of people when it comes to Hussein ibn Ali, when it comes to his mission. Because believe it or not, there are people out there who wish they had somebody like Hussein. One of the scholars mentions this idea that he was traveling in Africa, and in the airports he meets a certain number of scholars who were from the Vatican. Christian, they were priests. They meet him. He is a sheikh. He's a scholar from the Ahl al-Bayt. They come to greet him. They recognize him. They say, you are a Shi'i scholar. He said, yes. They say to him, we have studied your faith and we believe that these 12 leaders that you have not utilized. You have not maximized the benefit from. And if we had one of these 12 leaders, we would have indeed converted the entire world towards Christianity. So the Shaykh said to him, if you had a choice, who out of the 12 would you want to have? They said, we want Hussein ibn Ali. They desire and they wish to have somebody like Hussein ibn Ali in order for them to maximize. And that's the idea, that when we have this opportunity in this particular society to engage and to discuss and to take part in active propagation towards the madhab of Ahl al-Bayt, most of us are afraid. What about the people who are persecuted just because they love Ali ibn Abi Talib? What about the people around in certain countries around the world that they have to hide their faith and practice taqiyya? They can't be blamed for not spreading the message of the Ahl al-Bayt. But you and I have a much bigger responsibility, and you and I will be questioned on the Day of Judgment. What did we do? Yes, indeed we have to practice, and yes, indeed we have to recall what happened on the 10th of Muharram in our Hussainiyat, in our majalis, in our places. Yet Hussein does not belong to us. Hussein belongs to humanity in his principles, in his values, in his teachings. And therefore let the world know who Hussein is. Hence, Imam Zayn al-Abidin would speak to people and would say to them, I want to remind you about this world. Why? It's daru zawalin wa intiqal. He says, please brothers, understand this. He says, dunya, there's a rule. it changes. يوم لك ويوم عليك. You have a day which you're pleased, and you have another day which you are angry and upset. A man once came to one of the Khulafa al-Abbasiyin, and he was blind. And he said to the Khalifa Abbasi, he said to him, he said that I have the worst experience ever in life. He said, why? He said, a few days ago I was rich, I had everything, and today I have nothing and I'm blind. He said, what happened to you? He said, I was traveling with my family, and in the desert when I was traveling, all of a sudden there was some kind of an avalanche. I came close to a sea or a river, I didn't know, and the water swept me and my family, and I had my wife, my kids, everybody died except I held on to my young daughter, and I saw my camel survived. And what I did was, I grabbed them both and we went to an area. I could see my own children dying before my own eyes. So what I did was, I placed my young daughter next to the camel, and I went back to the area in order to try and find the bodies of the relatives. He said, I noticed at that time, I heard the cry of my daughter. I went back, I saw a fox or a vicious animal that was digging into the body of the daughter. In other words, was eating her, and she died. I was so upset that I didn't know what to do. And at that moment, all of a sudden, my camel started running. I don't know why. I said, I've lost everything. I can't lose my camel. I ran after the camel. I held the camel. The camel was so agitated, it hit me with its feet, and my eyes became blind. Subhanallah. Oh Allah, protect us from all the calamities. Imagine that when the human being has everything and all of a sudden has nothing. This vicious man by the name of Al-Mutawakkil Al-Abbasi, who tried in vain to flood the grave of Aba Abdullah Al-Hussein and to stop the followers and to amputate their limbs from the visitation of the shrine of Imam Al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamu alayh. This Mutawakkil one day was sitting in his majlis, and somebody said to him, he said, there is a sword, there's a lovely sword that I saw in Basra. It's made in India. And at that time they used to make really nice shiny swords in India. So he said, I saw it, it came to Basra. Mutawakkil said, I want that sword. Send a message to my governor to bring me the sword from Basra. They sent a message. The governor said, look, the man who had the sword sold it to another human being, another person who went to Yemen. Mutawakkil said, I don't care, I want that sword. Send to my representative and my Amir in Yemen, I want the sword. Eventually, they bring him the sword. When they present the sword before him, he admires it. He admires its beauty and says to his advisor, Al-Fath bin Khaqan, he says, I want you to find me a strong man who will use this sword to defend me and protect me when I need to. Fath goes and searches and finds a Turkish slave by the name of Baghir. By the name of Baghir. He was known for his bravery. He says, look, this is a great man. He presents him before Al-Mutawakkil. Al-Mutawakkil says and gives the sword to this man and said, you will protect me, you stand next to me, and you will safeguard my life. So Baghir was always standing next to Mutawakkil Al-Abbasi. Allahu Akbar. What happened? When the son of Mutawakkil conspired against his father, with a number of other Turkish men, they entered one of the nights when Al-Mutawakkil Al-Abbasi was drunk with his advisor Al-Fath bin Khaqan. What happened was that particular man, Baghir, was also conspiring with the Mutawakkil's son. They came, and the first time the sword was used was to cut Mutawakkil into pieces. Was to cut to the extent that his flesh mixed with the alcohol that they were drinking. Imagine, this is the dunya. This is what people run after. This is the danger of materialism. And that's what the Imam alayhi salam was trying to remind people, that don't be deceived by it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna wa'dallahi haqq. Surely this is the promise of Allah, which is absolute truth. فَلَا تَغُرَّنَّكُمُ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا. Make sure this world does not deceive you. Brothers and sisters, when we look at our lives, when we look at what we have and what we don't have, sometimes we get too obsessed and too possessed by this world. Sometimes when it came to looking for pleasures, we make it our ultimate motive. There is no problem with living a comfortable life. وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا, the Quran says. Don't live like a hermit or a monk. Don't isolate yourself, but don't make it your primary concern. The problem today, let me tell you what the problem is, and I want your attention in this particular point. Some of you who are studying medicine, and some of you who know a bit about the body and the physiology of the body, and most of us here, perhaps all of us here, have gone through an experience of pain, haven't we? Headache, toothache, backache, all kinds of different types of pain. We dislike it. We hate it. We want to get rid of it. The first thing we think about is what? Painkillers. Rush to the medicines cabinet. Take out the paracetamols and the ibuprofens or anything else. Some people go for food. They have the chocolate. Others go for timman, for instance. Anything that helps them in order to avoid the pain of their suffering. Now imagine, if you speak to the doctors, they'll tell you the majority of the time the body is sending you a signal that there's something wrong. The pain is a physiological response to some malfunction. Something's not working properly in your body. True? And what we do is we numb it. We take painkillers and we want to become better. We are told when it comes to our souls, our ruh, our nafs, it sometimes goes through pain. Tell me, how many of us have experienced the pain of our souls? How many of us have woken up and thought so bad, whereas everything is healthy, but we feel suffering? Suffering because we're far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're distant. We're not practicing our faith the way it should be. We're not as individuals whom the Ahl al-Bayt want us to be. And therefore we feel immense sadness, grief and sorrow. How many of us have gone through that in our lives? I suspect very, very few. And the reason for that is we have numbed the pain of the soul. How have we numbed the pain of the soul? Through materialism, through possessions, through wealth, through hubbud dunya, through the love of this world. The way we have numbed it is indeed like that. How? We seek anything that gives us pleasure. And when pleasure, it's like painkillers. Notice that unfortunately we had an incident about 10 days ago in the United Kingdom. Two people in Australia, radio presenters, they decided to play a practical joke, a hoax. So they call a hospital pretending to be the family or the royal family or the queen, and they want to speak to the royal couple who are there and are undergoing some treatment, or the princess that is undergoing some treatment. Of course, the nurse that picks up the phone thinks that they are genuine. Later on, it turns out to be a hoax. What does this person do? She commits suicide. She hangs herself, to the shock and to dismay of many people around the world. Now, it's highlighted to us a particular problem. That problem is the emptiness. That sometimes when the human being is cornered, and sometimes when the human being is in a very, very difficult position, and a scenario that does not indeed become easy to deal with, the only way in which we can exit the pain is to feel that we need to kill ourselves or remove ourselves from this world or isolate ourselves. And that's the problem when Imam Zain al-Abidin was trying to tell people who are so engrossed in materialism that the love of this world has overtaken and overwhelmed their thinking and their mentality, that they have made it at the expense of their faith and their akhirah, and that's indeed where their equation lies. When it becomes your purpose, when it becomes your ultimate objective. I always say to my brothers and sisters who are thinking about marriage, especially the youngsters or the youth who are wanting to get married, when they sit down with their prospective wife, and when the wife sits down with the prospective husband, normally they talk about what? What is your goal in life? So the answer would be, I want to get my qualification, I want to get a car, I want to get a house, I want to have children, I want to live comfortably. A lot of the times, very few times do we see responses, or actually do we hear of people saying to each other that my objective is to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to attain paradise. That's my goal in life. That's indeed. Because I recognize this life is transient. It doesn't mean I abandon it. It doesn't mean I go and live as poor as possible. No, Islam doesn't have a problem with acquiring wealth. But the wealth should not be possessive of you. You should be possessive of it, which means you can give it away at any minute. Imam Zayn al-Abidin was telling people, أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ أُحَذِّرُكُم مِّنَ الدُّنْيَا. Because why? Because people like Umar ibn Sa'ad was given a choice. Either you take the governorship of Ray by killing Hussein, or you won't get it. Or you will not obtain it. People like Ubaydullah ibn al-Hurr al-Ju'fi, when Imam al-Hussein on the way to Karbala, when he met him in Qasr Bani Muqatil, when he said to him, join me, you need to repent, I will guarantee Jannah for you. He says, Ya ibn Rasulullah, it's very difficult for me. I have my family, I have my possessions, I have my business. I give you my horse, I give you my sword. This is the mentality of the people of dunya. Therefore, Imam Zayn al-Abidin would want to remind and indeed awaken the thought of the masses. But essentially, what Sayyid al-Sajidin, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, would want to do continuously throughout this particular sermon and in later times and as well before, was to remind people about the extent of the atrocity that occurred on the 10th of Muharram. Was to remind people about who is it that was slain on the plains of Karbala. He would say towards the end, أَنَا ابْنُ الذَّبِيحِ بِكَرْبَلَا. He would say, I am the one who was slaughtered on the plains of Karbala. أَنَا ابْنُ الْمَسْلُوبِ الْإِمَامَةِ وَالرِّدَى. I'm the one whose turban and whose outer clothing were taken away. أَنَا ابْنُ مَنْ بَكَتْ عَلَيْهِ مَلَائِكَةُ السَّمَاءِ. He would continuously mention these sorrowful statements depicting graphically the atrocity that happened in the way about Abdullah al-Hussein was killed and his family and his companions were dealt with on the 10th of Muharram. And therefore you will find that at that moment when Imam Zayn al-Abidin would mention this, the people would burst out crying and weeping. Yazid recognized the danger. He immediately commanded someone to recite the Adhan. It wasn't the time for Salah, it wasn't the time for prayers. But Yazid wanted to stop the Imam, and that would be the only way he would stop the Imam. When the Mu'adhin would say Allahu Akbar, Imam alayhi salam would indeed at that moment would say, indeed, لَيْسَ شَيْءٌ أَكْبَرُ مِنَ اللَّهِ. And when the Mu'adhin would say, أَشْهَدُ أَن لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, Imam Al-Sajjad would say, indeed, my flesh, my blood, my existence, every particle of me bears witness that there is no Lord except Allah. And when the Mu'adhin would say, أَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ, Imam Al-Sajjad would look at Yazid and said, Ya Yazid, Muhammadun hada jadduka am jaddi. This Muhammad that is being mentioned, is he your grandfather or my grandfather? If you claim that he's my grandfather, then you're a liar. And if you claim that he is your grandfather, then you're a liar. And if you know that he is my grandfather, then why did you shed the blood of his grandson? Why did you do and commit such a evil, heinous crime in terms of treating his family members and taking them from one place to another? And hence you find Imam Zayn al-Abidin for many years weeping and crying in this particular form, in this particular remembrance. We are told that when he walks in the streets of Medina, he would see a sheep being slaughtered. And he would stop at the butchers and would say, this sheep that you're slaughtering, have you fed it some water? Have you quenched its thirst before you're slaughtering it? And the butcher would say, Ya ibn Rasulullah, this is the practice that we do for all the animals that we slaughter. At that moment, Imam Zayn al-Abidin would say, indeed, that feeling that idea that his father and his family members were all slaughtered on the plains of Karbala thirsty. He would say that even the sheep is given water before they are slaughtered, whereas my father and the Ahl al-Bayt and the companions died with this particular thirst. You find Imam Zayn al-Abidin crying and weeping, and someone saying to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, narrations saying to him, narrations telling us that Abu Hamza al-Thimali saying to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, why is it that you are crying? Isn't it that you know that this particular martyrdom has been granted for you? Imam Zayn al-Abidin would say, no, we know for sure that inna al-qatla lana aada wa karamatuna inda Allah al-shahada, that indeed this type of death is an honor for us, and martyrdom is a form of prestige for us. Yet, look at how Yaqub alayhi salam, when he lost his son Yusuf and he knew that his son was alive, he wept until he became blind. What about me? What about the people who witnessed so many members of Bani Hashim, so many of the children and the grandsons of Rasulullah in such a manner being slaughtered on the plains of Karbala? Allahu Akbar. One of the most difficult things that Imam Zayn al-Abidin would do would be to bury the body of his father, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. The narrations tell us that he came 3 days after Karbala. When he saw the bodies littered around the plains, when he came and sat next to the body of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, he wanted to bury the body of Abu Abdullah. Bani Asad had gathered. Bani Asad wanted to help. They said to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, let us help you. He would say, Inna ma'i man yu'inani. Indeed, with me there are those that will help me. At that moment, we are told in historical records that when he wanted to lower the body of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein inside the grave, he would call out to Bani Asad that give me a piece of cloth. They would say, why do you want a piece of cloth? He would say, it's because every time I pick up the body of my father Hussein, one part of it indeed falls out, one part of it, the body which is indeed shattered and torn into pieces, falls. Therefore he gathers the body parts of Hussein, his father, when he lowers it under the grave, when he places it there, those who have lost their loved ones, those who have experienced this sad grieving moment, when you lower a friend or a relative inside the grave, you wish to embrace them, you wish to hug them, you wish to kiss them. Imam Zayn al-Abidin would look at the body of his father Hussein, and there is no head to embrace, there is no face to kiss. When Imam Zayn al-Abidin would seal the grave of his father, he would write on the grave, هذا قبر الحسين بن علي الذي قتل مظلوما عطشانا بأرض كربلاء. Allahu Akbar. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, what kind of masa'ib, what kind of calamities and difficulties did he see? We are told in Sham, we are told when he was standing chained, one of the people saw Sayyid al-Sajjadeen. He came to him and said, Ya ibn Rasulullah, is there anything you want me to help you? He said, yes, if you have a piece of cloth, if you have any qumash, anything that I could utilize. He says, why? He said, it's because the chains around my neck are digging into my flesh and they're causing me pain. I wish to place some kind of cloth in between the chain and in between my flesh. This is the tragedy and this is the pain of the suffering of Sayyid al-Sajjadeen. Imam Mohammed al-Baqir says, in the final moments of the life of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, my father, I was sitting next to him weeping and crying, and I saw that my father كان يبكي ودموعه تجري على خديه. He was weeping and crying. I said to him, Abata, my father, why is it that you're crying? In his final moments, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, his body, the poison had spread throughout his body. He would say to him, Abata, mali araka tabki. Why am I seeing you cry? Zayn al-Abidin says, Bunayya, anta al-an tajlusu indi. You are sitting next to me. ولكنني تذكرت من جلس على صدر أبي الحسين. I remembered who sat on the chest of my father Hussein on the plains of Karbala. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين وإنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون.